The birthday boy arrived at the Family Feud studio wearing his favorite superhero t-shirt, the one with Captain America's shield stretched across his thin chest. 8-year-old Caleb Patterson had insisted on wearing it today because he'd told his mother that morning, superheroes are brave on their birthdays too. What he didn't say, what he'd been carefully keeping from his family for weeks, was that he wasn't sure he'd have another birthday to be brave for. Today was October 15th, Caleb's 9th birthday, and it was supposed to be a celebration. The Patterson family had driven 12 hours from rural Oklahoma to Los Angeles, making this Family Feud appearance the centerpiece of what they'd decided would be Caleb's best birthday ever. His parents, Jennifer and Mike Patterson, had carefully planned every detail of this trip, from the birthday dinner at his favorite restaurant to the hotel with the pool where Caleb could swim if he felt strong enough. What they hadn't planned for was the conversation with Dr. Morrison 3 weeks ago, the one where words like progression and limited time had been spoken in the gentle but devastating language that pediatric oncologists use when hope becomes more about comfort than cure. The leukemia that Caleb had been fighting for 2 years was winning, and everyone knew it except, hopefully, Caleb himself. But 8-year-olds are more perceptive than adults give them credit for. Caleb had noticed the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms. He'd seen the extra hugs, the indulgent yeses to requests that would normally earn a gentle no. He'd felt the weight of unspoken words in the way his parents looked at him when they thought he wasn't paying attention. And he understood, with the clarity that children sometimes possess about their own bodies, that something had changed. The Make-A-Wish Foundation had fast-tracked Caleb's request when they learned about his prognosis. His wish had been heartbreakingly simple. He wanted to be on Family Feud on his birthday, because Steve Harvey always made people laugh, and he wanted his family to laugh on what might be his last birthday, even though he couldn't bring himself to say those words out loud. Standing on the Family Feud stage now, surrounded by bright lights and the energy of live television, Caleb felt simultaneously more alive than he had in weeks, and more tired than he'd ever been. The chemotherapy had taken his hair months ago, leaving him with a collection of baseball caps that had become part of his daily uniform. Today he wore his favorite, a blue cap with a birthday cake embroidered on the front, a gift from his little sister Emma, who was too young to fully understand why everyone had been so sad lately. Steve Harvey approached the Patterson family during rehearsal with his characteristic warmth, but something about Caleb immediately caught his attention. Maybe it was the way this 8-year-old carried himself with a composure that seemed too mature for his age. Maybe it was the careful way his parents positioned themselves near him, protective without being obvious about it. Or maybe it was simply the fact that Steve Harvey, grandfather himself, had developed an instinct for recognizing children who were carrying burdens too heavy for small shoulders. "Well, look here," Steve said, kneeling down to Caleb's level with that genuine smile that had endeared him to millions. "Who's this handsome young man?" "I'm Caleb," the boy replied, his voice strong despite his slight frame. "Today's my birthday. I'm 9 now." 9 years old, Steve exclaimed with the enthusiasm that made children light up. "That's a big number. How does it feel to be 9? Caleb considered the question with the seriousness that had become characteristic of his interactions with adults over the past few months. "It feels important," he said simply. "Like something I worked really hard for." Something in the way Caleb said those words, the weight he gave to what should have been a simple milestone, made Steve pause. Most 9-year-olds took birthdays for granted, saw them as automatic progression rather than achievements. But Caleb spoke about turning 9 like it was a victory he'd earned, rather than a date he'd reached. The game began with the typical Family Feud energy that Steve orchestrated so masterfully. The Patterson family was competing against the Rodriguez family from Arizona, and both groups brought the kind of warm, competitive spirit that made for great television. Caleb surprised everyone, including himself, with his sharp answers. When Steve asked for something you might find at a birthday party, Caleb had buzzed in confidently, with cake, earning the #1 spot on the board, and a celebration from his family that felt like they'd won the lottery. For the first 3 rounds, Caleb was just a smart, funny kid having the time of his life on television. He high-fived his parents after correct answers, did a little victory dance that made the studio audience laugh with delight, and trash-talked the opposing family with the kind of innocent competitiveness that made Steve grin. For precious minutes at a time, the weight of diagnosis and prognosis seemed to lift from the entire Patterson family. But during the fourth round, everything changed. The question was designed to be light-hearted, the kind of prompt that usually generated sweet, innocent answers from children that made audiences smile. "We asked 100 people," Steve announced with his signature enthusiasm. "What is your birthday wish this year?" It was Caleb's turn at the podium. He stepped forward with the confidence he'd gained throughout the game, the studio lights catching his birthday cap and the determined set of his small shoulders. His family watched from their podium with the pride that had sustained them through 2 years of treatments and hospital stays, and the kind of fear that lived in the background of every normal moment. Steve repeated the question with a smile. "What is your birthday wish this year?" Caleb looked up at Steve with eyes that seemed older than 9, older than they should have been, older than any child's eyes should ever be. And when he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, carrying across the studio with a certainty that hit everyone who heard it like a physical force. "I just want to have another birthday." The words landed in the studio like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of understanding and heartbreak through the audience. It wasn't the phrasing that devastated everyone who heard it, though that was profound enough. It was the matter-of-fact way Caleb said it, like he was stating a simple truth that everyone already knew but no one had been willing to acknowledge. Steve's smile didn't fade immediately. His brain needed a moment to process what he'd heard, to understand that this 9-year-old boy had just articulated a wish that most children his age would never need to make. "I'm sorry, what did you say, buddy?" Steve asked, his voice gentler now, sensing that something significant had just happened. Caleb repeated his answer with the same steady clarity. "I just want to have another birthday. I want to turn 10. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The studio fell completely silent. Not the expectant quiet of an audience waiting for the next laugh, but the heavy silence of 300 people collectively processing something too big and too sad to immediately comprehend. Steve set his cards down, not dropped them in shock, but placed them deliberately on his podium as he made the conscious choice to stop being a game show host and start being a human being who had just met a child facing the unthinkable. Steve walked around his podium and approached Caleb at the family buzzer, his movements slow and deliberate. When he reached the 9-year-old, he knelt down so they were eye level, his attention completely focused on this remarkable boy who had just shared the deepest truth of his young life on national television. "Caleb," Steve said softly, his voice stripped of all performance. "Tell me about that wish." Caleb looked into Steve's eyes and saw something he'd been missing from most adults lately. Honesty instead of pity, directness instead of careful euphemisms. "The doctors told my mom and dad that I might not get to have very many more birthdays," Caleb said, his voice remaining steady. "I heard them talking when they thought I was sleeping, and I've been thinking about it, and I decided that if I might not get to have lots of birthdays, then I want to make sure I really celebrate this one." The camera operators, who had filmed thousands of hours of television, found themselves struggling to maintain their professional composure. In the control room, producers who usually focused on pacing in commercial breaks were reaching for tissues. Even the competing Rodriguez family had abandoned any pretense of competition, their attention completely focused on this 9-year-old boy who was teaching everyone in the studio about courage and acceptance. Steve felt his own eyes filling with tears, but he didn't try to hide them. In that moment, sitting on the floor of his game show stage with a 9-year-old who understood mortality better than most adults, Steve Harvey wasn't a television host. He was a grandfather, a father, a human being who recognized extraordinary bravery when he saw it. "Caleb," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "how long have you been thinking about this?" "Since we found out about coming here," Caleb replied. "I wanted my family to have fun on my birthday, even if it's one of the last ones. I wanted them to remember laughing." That's when Steve Harvey did something unprecedented in his decades of television hosting. He stood up, removed his suit jacket, and wrapped it around Caleb's thin shoulders. But this time, it wasn't just his signature gesture of comfort. This time, it was a recognition of courage that transcended age, circumstances, or anything that usually mattered in the world of entertainment. "Caleb," Steve said loud enough for the entire studio to hear, This jacket has been with me for thousands of shows, but it has never been worn by anyone as brave as you." Steve stood and turned to address the entire studio. The audience, the competing families, the crew members who had stopped their usual background work to focus on what was happening at center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, his voice carrying an authority that commanded complete attention. "We are going to do something that has never been done in the history of Family Feud. We are going to turn this into the best birthday party anyone has ever seen." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, making a call right there on stage in front of everyone. "Marcus, it's Steve Harvey. I need you to stop everything and get me the biggest birthday cake you can find. No, bigger than that. And balloons. And decorations. And I need it all here in 20 minutes, because we're throwing a birthday party for the bravest kid in America." Steve ended the call and looked back at Caleb, who was staring at him with wide eyes, the oversized jacket making him look even smaller, but somehow more dignified. "Caleb, you said you wanted your family to remember laughing on your birthday. Well, we're going to make sure they remember a lot more than that. We're going to make sure they remember the day when 300 strangers became your family, and when your birthday wish became everyone's birthday wish." What happened next transcended television and became something magical. The show's crew transformed the Family Feud stage into a birthday party venue with speed and enthusiasm that suggested they understood they were participating in something sacred. Balloons appeared from nowhere, decorations materialized. And when the largest birthday cake anyone had ever seen was wheeled onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause that felt less like entertainment and more like celebration of life itself. But Steve wasn't finished. He had one more surprise for Caleb. One more way to ensure that this birthday would be remembered, not for what it might represent, but for the joy it contained. "Caleb," Steve said, "I want everyone in this studio to sing happy birthday to you. But first, I want to make you a promise." Steve knelt down again, looking directly into Caleb's eyes with the kind of intensity that suggested he was making a vow he intended to keep. "Every birthday you have, for as long as you want me to, I'm going to call you and we're going to celebrate together. Because your wish to have another birthday just became my wish too. And I believe in the power of wishes, especially when they come from someone as special as you." The happy birthday that followed wasn't just sung. It was celebrated by 300 voices united in the simple desire to honor a 9-year-old's courage. Caleb stood in the center of it all, wearing Steve's jacket like royal robes. His face lit up with genuine joy that reminded everyone watching that childhood wonder could coexist with profound wisdom. When the singing ended and the confetti settled, Steve made one final announcement. "This episode is going to air exactly as it happened," he told the studio audience. "Because sometimes television needs to remind people what really matters. And what matters is celebrating every birthday we get, cherishing every moment we have, and recognizing that courage comes in all sizes, even 9-year-old sizes." 2 years later, Steve Harvey received the phone call he'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. "Steve, this is Jennifer Patterson, Caleb's mom. I wanted to call you personally to let you know that Caleb just had his 11th birthday party." Steve's hand tightened on the phone. "How is he?" "He's amazing," Jennifer replied, her voice full of joy that Steve had learned not to take for granted. The new treatment worked. The doctors are using words like remission and hopeful. He's still fighting, but he's winning. 3 months after that call, Steve received a package in the mail. Inside was a photo of Caleb at his 11th birthday party, wearing the suit jacket Steve had given him on that October day at the Family Feud studio. He was taller now, his hair had grown back, and his smile was the confident grin of a child who had faced the unthinkable and emerged victorious. But the most meaningful item in the package was a handwritten note. "Dear Steve, thank you for making my 9th birthday the best day ever. You helped me have another birthday, and another one after that. My wish came true, because you believed in wishes too. Love, Caleb." Age 11 3/4. The episode, when it aired, became a cultural phenomenon, not because of the game or the competition, but because viewers witnessed something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. They saw a child facing the ultimate uncertainty with grace and courage, and they saw adults responding with love instead of pity, with celebration instead of despair. Steve began incorporating Caleb's message into his motivational speaking, often saying, "A 9-year-old taught me that every birthday is a victory, every year is a gift, and every wish deserves to be taken seriously." The jacket that Steve gave Caleb became a symbol of hope in pediatric cancer wards across the country. Other children began asking for birthday jackets during their treatments, and eventually, Steve's foundation partnered with children's hospitals to provide special jackets for young patients, each one labeled with a simple message: "For the birthday warriors who teach us what courage looks like." On Caleb's 12th birthday, Steve kept his promise and called to sing happy birthday. When he finished, Caleb had something important to tell him. "Steve," he said, his voice now that of a confident 12-year-old, "I got my wish. I got another birthday, and another one, and another one, and now I know what I want to wish for next." "What's that, buddy?" Steve asked. "I want to help other kids get their birthday wishes too. I want to work with kids like me, kids who have to wish for things that other kids get to take for granted." Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of shows, had made millions of people laugh, had built a career on bringing joy to others. But he would always say that 9-year-old Caleb Patterson taught him the most important lesson of his life, that every birthday is a miracle. Every wish matters, and sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from someone who simply wants the chance to turn 10. Because that's what happens when a 9-year-old reminds an entire television studio that growing older isn't something to dread, it's something to celebrate, something to fight for, something to wish for with all your heart. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten, because sometimes the most powerful birthday wish isn't for toys or treats, it's for time itself.